Reprise de débat. Resuming debate. The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I am pleased to say that I will be splitting my time with the member from Trois-Rivières. It's almost been a year since Parliament passed a motion to ask the government to keep its promise to Canadians, and that promise was to cap the stock option deduction loophole used by wealthy Canadians to not pay their fair share of taxes, and to take aggressive action to combat tax havens where corporations and wealthy Canadians put their money as a way to not pay taxes here in Canada. The government has yet to do either, and this is a huge disappointment to people in my community. It is almost time, Madam Speaker, for another budget, and the government has an opportunity to finally tackle the tax havens that siphon off billions of dollars of government revenue, and they can also finally close the stock option deduction loophole that allows the wealthiest Canadians to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. The Canada Child Benefit was supposed to lift 9 million children out of poverty. But sadly, the very same kids they claim to be helping this government aren't even receiving the benefit. And I know that, Madam Speaker, because I've asked that department directly. And they can't tell me, and they can't tell us, they can't tell Canadians, if all the eligible families are actually receiving the benefit. In my riding, there are countless stories of single mothers being asked to go to ridiculous lengths just to submit a claim, and of those already receiving it being suspended for no good reason. I have families in my riding that have lost their home because of not receiving their Canada Child Benefit that they were eligible for, and who only finally received it because of help from my office. I even had a family that agreed to go on national TV and talk about their horror story with the CRA. The day after they appeared on TV, Canada Revenue Agency called them, something they had a really hard time getting done before, and said they would be receiving their Canada Child Benefit. My office helped one young single parent receive her Canada Child Benefit who had provided the CRA with 75 pages of documentation to prove her eligibility and was still denied Canada Child Benefit. This is beyond, it's obvious, obviously, it is beyond unacceptable. It actually is cruel. What many parents are forced to go through to prove their eligibility, there is something seriously wrong here. This is a tragic illustration of the growing inequality in our country, and that is families who are struggling to make ends meet are being made to prove and reprove their eligibility, yet millionaires who willfully defraud the government are given a free pass. Why is there such a double standard in the way the Canada Revenue Agency treats Canadians? We have sweetheart deals for rich Canadians who have been caught not paying their taxes, and of course, penalties for the rest of us. In my community of Saskatoon, there aren't many millionaires who have a need for tax havens, and not many people who own these stock options to use them to pay less tax. But there are a lot of people in my riding, a lot of people in my community who can't get service at a counter anymore from the Canada Revenue Agency because it's been closed, and who had a lot of trouble getting a form, simply a form, at tax time last year. I wrote to the Minister about these problems last year, and I am glad to see that some improvements have been announced for this coming tax year. However, the best news would be if the government would announce its intention to make our tax system fair for everyone. The vast majority of Canadians will like their government to plug the stock option loophole and track down the lost billions of dollars that have been socked away on Caribbean islands. Here are a couple examples of the stark income and wealth inequality in Canada that our tax system is perpetuating. Just 2 Canadian billionaires own the same amount of wealth as nearly 12 million Canadians. That's a third of the population here in Canada. A third of the population. That's just unbelievable. These 2 Canadian billionaires have $33.1 billion, and that's U.S. in wealth. By lunchtime on January 1st, Canada's richest CEOs earn the same amount as an average Canadian earns in an entire year. A recent study by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives shows that 59 tax measures that mostly benefit people above the average income level in Canada cost the government more than $100 billion in 1 year. In most of Canada, profit from stock options is considered to be a capital gain, and therefore it's taxed at half the rate of regular employment income, the kind of income most of us earn and claim on our income tax. And this tool is primarily used, although it had different purposes at the beginning, it really is primarily used, and we've heard the stats, by Canada's ultra-rich as a way to simply pay less taxes. Stock options now make up almost 25% of CEO compensation at Canada's top 60 publicly traded companies. This costs federal and provincial governments close to $1 billion each year. I'd like to note that the Quebec government applies the standard provincial income tax rate to profit from stock options, and to that I say bravo, and I say federal government, follow that lead. The use of offshore tax havens by Canadian companies and wealthy Canadians is at its highest in history and is costing Canadians between $5 and $8 billion each and every year. A year ago, the NDP asked the finance minister to not only address the imbalance that currently exists in how CRA treats the top 1%, and of course the rest of us, but also to take concrete, immediate action to recoup the billions of dollars lost to tax fraud and tax haven. Dollars that could be funding healthcare, education, infrastructure, dollars that could be used to fund more affordable housing, a national free prescription drug program, affordable childcare, a fair living wage. So, Madam Speaker, just imagine if everyone paid their fair share instead of just some of us. But because the government refuses to collect billions of dollars lost every year, we can't do the things we need to do. Yesterday I met with Colton, Chance, and Charlotte, and I just realized now their names all start with C for some reason. 3 brilliant students who were representing the Canadian Federation of Students. They came to talk to me about how the government could really help students pursue their dreams of post-secondary education, to realize their potential, to pursue their careers. And I want to thank them for bringing to my attention what would be possible for a government that really wanted to help students. And lo and behold, they proposed eliminating the stock option loophole as a way for the government to have the needed revenue to help students. And here's an example they shared with me. Because of decrease in government funding over the last 10 years, 10,000 Indigenous students are currently waiting to exercise their treaty right to post-secondary education. The government promised, while trying to get elected, $50 million annually that would be added to the current funding to address this backlog of students trying to get an education. By simply eliminating the stock option deduction loophole, the government could fund their promise, this promise to students. They could help these students with this simple one measure for the next 15 years. Before Christmas, I had the honor of meeting women in the Trade Journey program at the YWCA. These are women, mostly young women with children, exploring careers in the trades. And we had a great discussion, and we talked about what would really make a difference for them, for women in these traditionally male-dominated professions. And what did they say? Affordable, accessible childcare was key for these women to pursue their post-secondary education to realize their dreams of becoming journey persons. They didn't understand why their government didn't seem to understand why childcare was so important to their success as parents and as journey persons. Lastly, Madam Speaker, we have a national housing strategy that says it can't end homelessness, not even in 10 years. Just a half of those who are homeless will be helped. The other 50% are literally going to be left out in the cold. Just a fraction of the billions of lost revenue would make a huge and immediate difference, and we could actually make homelessness history. It's a simple equation, Madam Speaker. By making sure all Canadians pay their fair share, by not giving wealthy Canadians a free pass, by ending the stock option deduction loophole. By simply collecting the taxes owed, the government has an opportunity to match their words with action. I look forward, ever hopeful, that the 2018 budget will be a budget for all Canadians and not just a few. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the member that spoke makes reference to the 2018 budget and talks about other initiatives. The individual that introduced the motion talked about it's all about fairness. Used the pharmacare as an example. There was the pharmacare as one of the examples. There was a second example that was used, and I think that listeners should be aware that the government has very much acted when they referenced housing, and that was the second example that the previous speaker had used. You know, we had the housing strategy. Billions of dollars. The biggest housing strategy that has been developed and brought forward to this House in probably the history of our country. We have a health committee. You know, members of Parliament within the Liberal caucus have been advocating now for months about the importance of trying to develop some sort of a pharmacare program. We recognize the stakeholders. In fact, the health care committee is actually investigating that particular issue with the idea of coming up with a report led by Liberal members of Parliament. You know, the government is moving forward on many progressive areas. The question I have for my colleague across the way is related to the just under $1 billion that's being invested by the Minister responsible for revenue to look at recuperating literally hundreds of millions going into the billions of dollars of those individuals that are owed taxes, that are not paying taxes, and what are her thoughts in regards to that?
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my fellow Prairie colleague for his eventually getting to the question. I guess, and I'm being a bit funny here, just to the point, I think we have heard this government talking a lot about things. They're talking about childcare. They're doing sort of provincial arrangements. It has not had any impact in people's lives yet. They're talking about a national drug prescription program. What I presented was an opportunity to stop talking about those things and to actually do them. I also talked about a program that they, you know, trumpet all over Canada about helping children. I gave you an opportunity to find a way to even do that better. That's something that you need to follow through on. And I guess my comments about housing are that many of that money is beyond the mandate of this government. It's spread out over 10 years. There's very little investment in the beginning, and its sort of goal to reduce homelessness could be way better and is not brave, and this government should really step up. Thank you.
I want to remind the member for Saskatoon West to address the questions to the chair as opposed to, and so maybe if people would, individuals wouldn't use the word you, it would make things a lot easier. Questions and comments, Honorable Député de Provencher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Saskatoon West for her speech. And you know, I was listening very carefully to it, and I get the impression that somehow she has an offense with individuals that design things, that create jobs, that develop products, that bring them to market, and actually achieve a measure of success and become wealthy. And we need to understand that the wealthy in our country pay over 50% tax when you combine the provincial and federal portions of their tax. And I'm just wondering why it is that I get a sense that there's not an appreciation for the people that create jobs, create products, design products, and boost our economy.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West has under a minute to respond.
Well, I want to thank my honourable colleague for the question, and I want to first state that I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs, for people that build things, that people that develop products and things. It's something I don't have the skill to do, and I have a lot of respect for that. What I was talking about in my speech was fairness. It wasn't giving one group a reduction or a lower tax rate than the other group. And what I was saying is that this government could step forward and actually follow through on the promises they made to Canadians during the election. If they followed through on their promises to do the things we've asked them to do a year ago, they would actually have the funds without raising taxes to actually do the things they said, like childcare and housing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.